course, will remember this for the rest of their lives, that they got to be on the west front of the Capitol with tens of thousands more to hear Pope Francis this historic day as he is set to address members of Congress and the country. This is a CBS News special report following the Pope's visit to the United States Capitol. He just left the nunciature and is on his way here to the Capitol. Nancy Cordes is here on Capitol Hill with us. Nancy, good morning.
Good morning to you, Nora. And the Pope will be pulling up in just a few minutes here at the east front of the Capitol. He'll be entering at the House carriage door just behind me. And then he'll be going in where he'll be meeting first with House Speaker John Boehner, who, as you mentioned, has been looking forward to a day like this for 20 years. He invited 3 separate popes to come here to speak to the U.S. Capitol, and this pope is the first one who accepted. The invitation was extended about 18 months ago. They waited nervously for a few months to see if he would say yes, and he did. Boehner joked yesterday that normally when he greets world leaders, he asks them, how's the economy doing in your country? But that probably won't work here, he said, so he's going to have to think of something else. Boehner, of course, is Catholic. He and his 11 siblings were all sent to Catholic schools, and House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi is Catholic as well. She'll have a chance to meet with the Pope right after Boehner has his private meeting. So this is a very exciting day on Capitol Hill. Nearly a third of members of Congress are Catholic, and even though they know that the Pope will probably bring up some issues that cause some discomfort with both sides of the aisle, they are looking forward to hearing from this spiritual leader, and they're all being told to be on their best behavior, Nora.
And Nancy, let me ask you, this is a joint meeting of Congress, but we normally see these occasions like a State of the Union or address most recently by Prime Minister Netanyahu. So this is different to see a pope in that setting. What about the decorum? How will lawmakers react? Will they stand and applaud like it's a political speech? What have they been told to do?
You know, even members aren't quite sure how this is going to go down. Normally, as you mentioned with the State of the Union, you see one side jump up when they hear something that they like, and the other side perhaps sits on its hands. In this case, they just don't know if they're going to sort of sit respectfully throughout the speech or if they'll applaud when they hear things that they like. They've been told to be respectful, but if the spirit moves them, so to speak, they may very well applaud, which would kind of lengthen the address. One thing they have been told point blank not to do is try to reach out to the Pope as he walks down the center aisle. We've seen those images over the years of the president as he walks down the aisle to give his State of the Union address, and he gets mobbed by members of Congress who get there early to get their spot on the aisle. They want to get a picture with him. They want to shake his hand. They want to be seen with him. And so today they're trying something different to try to prevent that from happening. The leaders of the House have appointed 16 members as so-called enforcers. These are people from both sides who will be taking their place in seats strategically on the aisle, and they'll essentially be telling the other members, stay away, stay in your seats, don't try to get a blessing from the Pope, certainly don't try to get a selfie with the Pope, which is something I wouldn't put past some members of Congress. So let's see if this new strategy works.
All right, Nancy Cordes here on Capitol Hill as well. Nancy, thank you so much. I want to bring in Father Thomas Rosica. He is a Deputy Vatican spokesman. He's also here on Capitol Hill. Father, good morning. So great to have you with us. Let me ask you, why did the Pope accept this invitation?
Because it was a very good invitation and a very good opportunity to unite people together. That's what he's been doing since the beginning, and he's going to do it again this morning.
What do you expect he'll say in his remarks?
Well, I think we have an idea of what he's going to say if we look back over the past couple months in his efforts to speak to the heart of every single human being. This is not a pope who comes to lambaste or to blast or to reprimand. It's a pope who comes to encourage, to bless, and to ask us to be better people, to take responsibility for our brothers and sisters, to be aware of the great situations and tragedies in the world, to respect human life, but also to care for creation. This whole theme of Laudato Si has been running through everything he's done in all the different countries, especially since the publication of the encyclical, his address yesterday at the White House, his ability to bring out the best of human beings And I have no doubt that he's going to do that. And for those who think that this is an old man, 78 years old, never came to America. The first time he set foot in America was at the Joint Andrews Air Force Base the other day. He probably knows much more about us, about our challenges, about our history, than we know about ourselves. And I think we're going to see that come through once again brilliantly this morning.
I know, Father Rosica, that this is a pastoral visit, but it appears to have some political overtones with his remarks on climate change yesterday and even the first words in English out of his mouth at the White House on immigration. What is his goal there to address these, what have been polarizing issues here in the Congress and certainly in our political debate?
Let's be very honest and realize that the playbook or the lexicon of this whole visit and of Pope Francis's ministry, his service, is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if we look at what Jesus does in his time, in the period of the New Testament, Jesus addresses people in real situations. And whenever the Word of God enters into human history, you can't help but have a clash, a meeting of minds, and that's called politics. That's when people come together to say, this is not pie-in-the-sky theology, but what the Pope is teaching us is to say, yes, God is love, but here's how it's lived out. God cares for us in the poorest of the poor. All of those things are a meeting of mind and heart and lived spirituality. The Second Vatican Council spoke about Gaudium et Spes, the pastoral constitution of the Church. And that particular document tells us, unless the gospel meets people where they are and takes action, then it's pie in the sky. Francis is reminding us that our religion, our faith, the Catholic faith, the Christian faith, is an encounter with the real world. And whenever that happens, there's a political overtone, a political ramification. Because if there isn't, I'd be very concerned.
Father Rosica, if you'll stand by with us, we can hear that the Pope is getting close here to the U.S. Capitol. There is a chopper that is flying over his motorcade, and so we are expecting the Pope, His Holiness, to arrive here very shortly. Charlie and Gail, you know, it's wonderful to be here in these crowds because people have this just sense of anticipation, sort of waiting. Everyone's sort of quiet and sort of looking to the left and looking to the right in anticipation that the Pope will be here very, very shortly.
Nora, I'm struck by the notion that it was not that long ago, in 1960, during the presidential campaign of a Catholic Democratic nominee, John F. Kennedy, that he had to say that he would not take orders from the Vatican. Now, the principal of the Vatican comes to Washington not to give them orders, but to share his mission with great enthusiasm. Father, go ahead, Nora.
Yeah, I mean, it's a important point, and you know, look, Catholicism is still the largest denomination in America. There are we're about 70 million Catholics, and this is a very Catholic Congress, as Nancy Cordes has pointed out. 6 of the Republican presidential candidates are Catholic. So while there is still the separation of church, and that is an ideal here in America, there is on both sides of the aisle, among many religions, respect for His Holiness.
And 2/3 of the Supreme Court are Catholic, yes. 6 out of 9. Father Monsignor Figueiredo, here he comes. He clearly has said this is about pastoral activities, and it's also about political activities. Do you expect him to drill down on those political activities, those political messages that he believes are for humankind?
I think he will, but I believe that he will approach it on the basis of seeking a common ground. This is a Pope who wishes to build bridges, not construct walls. And so he is going to be hitting some hard issues. Religious freedom, I believe. He's going to be hitting issues, immigration, the environment, perhaps even the death penalty, perhaps issues concerning poverty.
But issues in which there'll be adherence to certain issues on both sides of the aisle.
He wants to reach out to all. Yesterday, Charlie, the Pope said something that struck me. The heart of the Pope expands to include everyone. And he wants to seek dialogue and cooperation with a nation that he knows is great.
Dialogue is a big thing with him.
It is absolutely encounter, dialogue, cooperation. That's the way he wants to move forward, because so much in the past has been polarized. We've been against each other. It's achieved nothing.
As you say that, we can see the Pope motorcade coming in sight of our cameras at the Capitol. So he will be there in a moment.
Just moments away, Professor Candida Moss, who's a professor of theology, from Notre Dame in New York. This is the first time a pontiff has ever addressed a joint meeting of Congress. What is the significance of this to you, from a historical point of view?
To me, from a historical point of view, I think it's very significant that John Boehner has invited the leader of the Catholic Church to come speak to Congress directly. He's inviting him to speak to political issues in many ways, and he's recognizing the enormous moral authority that this Pope in particular already has in the United States. Historically, popes have had a lot of influence. That's something during JFK's time that people were concerned about. They were concerned about the influence of the Pope. But things are different now.
They welcome it.
Yes.
What do you expect to hear from this speech? Either one of you. Monsignor, let's start with you.
I would again say we're going to hear a lot about dialogue, cooperation, reaching out to others. He's going to identify himself with immigrants, identify himself with the elderly, identify himself with workers, with the poor, encouraging all of us, let's work together to help others. That is our common ground.
And speaking in English again today. I think many people were impressed because you could tell, as you told us yesterday, he's been taking English lessons.
Yes, and I think it comes out with much greater conviction because here is a man who is vulnerable.
Not only speaking in English, but doing it well in terms of inflection, emphasis. He's given the language his own sort of feeling.
Absolutely. And, you know, through that language, Charlie and Gail, I believe that the greatest language which shines through all of this is the language of love. He really is embracing everyone and reaching people's hearts. And he will do that today with Congress through the language of love.
Will he talk about, not at this particular speech to the Congress, but during this visit to Americans about Catholic doctrine?
Yes, I expect when he gets to Philadelphia and he addresses the World Meeting of Families, he's going to talk about doctrine explicitly there. I think we're going to see allusions to doctrine in his speech today.
As we look at our screens, we see the Pope pulling into the U.S. Capitol, the first Pope ever to have the opportunity to speak to members of Congress, including behind him will be the Vice President and the Speaker of the House.
Arriving again, Nora, in his little Fiat, as everyone is calling it.
Yes, right, in all of his humility, in a car that gets about 35 to 38 miles a gallon. So just as he's been talking about air pollution and climate change, he's in a fuel-efficient vehicle, a small, humble vehicle, if you will. He has gone up Independence Avenue, then gone across First Avenue to get a glimpse of the Library of Congress and the Supreme Court, and then pulling in here on Constitution Avenue, where the idea was that he would be able to see as many people this way and also get a glimpse of some of the more spectacular and places here in the United States. And as you can see, he's pulling in there. You know, it's, as someone who's covered politics before, motorcades are usually noisy. There's a siren that goes off, not with the Pope. It's just quiet. You just hear the hum of all of the cars. And so he is pulling in now in his tiny Fiat, and in fact I can see the beginning of the motorcade from my vantage point. The back windows of his Fiat are rolled down and people are cheering and waving and snapping photos.
We can see him through the window as he waves from the back seat.
Yes, and he will be greeted by the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, and Vice President Joe Biden. John Boehner, one of 11 kids who went to Mass every day, trying to get Pope here for 20 years. So people said he's like a schoolboy today. He is so excited. And can you hear the crowd cheering? Oh, there he is. There's the Pope. He waved. And he is going to be greeted here at the House door by the Vice President and the Speaker of the House. Make no mistake, this is historic to have His Holiness here in the United States Capitol under a great deal of security.
And Nora, what a moment for John Boehner today. It must be a very emotional moment. I know I just heard you say he feels very giddy, but he must be feeling very emotional as someone who grew up Catholic and practiced the faith religiously.
Incredibly emotional, and we have seen John Boehner has been granted 5 tickets because he is the Speaker of the House, so he will have members of his family here with him, as well as others. But yes, I do think it's an emotional day for him as a Catholic and someone who's worked for 20 years. Can you imagine 20 years ago, sending his first letter to get a pope here, and the realization of this dream and what it will mean, and just at a difficult time for him, quite frankly. You know, he's dealing with almost a government shutdown next week and a restless Republican caucus, some of whom want to replace him in his current job. But this is a moment of unity here on Capitol Hill, a rare moment of unity as Pope Francis is set to make about a speech that some are saying could be about 30 minutes in length.
One of the interesting things is how different members of Congress have chosen who to give their allotment of tickets. John Boehner has given 2 of his to the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, and his wife, who is a Catholic. As we see now, there is the Speaker of the House with great anticipation, with this, it looks like a green tie, as he thinks about what he's going to say and do. And his heart, I'm sure, is beating fast as he has invited other Catholic popes to come, and this is the one who came.
Charlie, they're already talking. Everybody knows John Boehner to be a very emotional man, and they're saying they're taking bets on how long before you see tears. Before you see tears. You know, he got 5 tickets, as Nora pointed out. Everybody else got 1 ticket today.
And including in those tickets is the parent of his chief of staff who died.
Like yourself, this is a big deal. Still feel like a big deal.
Look at him. It's like they're telling him what's going on as he waits. You got to imagine. Look at that. You got to imagine that he is feeling as much emotion for this moment as you can possibly think.
And Charlie and Gail, I should tell you, after this meeting here, he will enter the House chamber. After the address, he's going to walk through Statuary Hall, passing in front of a statue of Juniper Serra. That is actually who he canonized just yesterday. This is, of course, one of 2 figures in the Capitol representing California. The other is President Reagan. But the Serra statue shows him staring towards the heaven with a cross in his hand, and many people credit him with bringing Catholicism to many in the West.
Nora, what is the room that the Speaker is standing in right now? There are a lot of chairs. What is going to happen here?
This is a ceremonial room that the Speaker of the House has, and so this is just for sort of a small meet and greet, a photo opportunity before, and a light exchange of welcomes before he enters into the House chamber for this joint meeting of Congress, which will have both members from the House of Representatives and from the Senate, as well as some invited guests.
Is the Vice President going to greet him, the Pope, in this room?
Yes, the Pope, he is going to greet the Pope in this room. Nancy Cordes is also with me here on Capitol Hill. Nancy, you've been with the Speaker recently. I mean, this is a moment for him personally.
And you can tell just looking at his face, Nora, that this is a moment for him. I mean, this is a man who has cried in an interview on the Golf Channel. He cries at statue unveilings. He is an emotional person. I think he's cried twice on 60 Minutes. And so you can see him here, you know, clearly trying to hold it together. But I think this is one instance where he or anyone from the Catholic faith could be forgiven for crying in a public setting, because this is so meaningful for him. He has talked about the fact that when he was growing up, his family had 2 pictures on the wall, 2 portraits, one of President John F. Kennedy and one of the Pope. And that's why long before he was the Speaker of the House or even the leader of the Republican Party in Congress, he was trying to bring a Pope here to Capitol Hill. And he said very openly yesterday he's not really sure what he's going to say to the Pope when he finally meets him in person. He's just looking forward to the opportunity. He'll have that special time for a couple of minutes, but then you see those chairs arrayed there, then the other leaders will come in. Nancy Pelosi, who is also Catholic. You'll see the leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, Harry Reid, the leader of Democrats in the Senate, and Kevin McCarthy, who's the #2 Republican in the House of Representatives. They'll all be there as well, and there's the Pope now.
There he is. Pope Francis comes to see the Speaker before this historic address to the Congress.
Really glad that you're here. All right.
It's good to see you.
How are you? Mr. Speaker, how are you? Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Somebody can have a conversation.
Thanks so much for the invitation.
I appreciate Ms. Owen's willingness to come and accept our invitation.
The speaker not only a responsible for his prison, he's one of the great supporters of education for children.
I wanted to wear the old consortium tie.
So we watched this conversation between the Speaker of the House and Pope Francis. Monsignor, who else is in the room accompanying the Holy Father?
Of the Holy Father, we have the Secretary of State, Cardinal Parolin, and 3 of his deputies. Also Cardinal Donald Wold, who is the Archbishop of Washington. And finally, the Apostolic Nuncio, Carlo Maria Vigano, who's the Pope's representative for the whole of the United States. Just behind the Pope there is an official of the Secretary of State, from Gibraltar, incidentally, who does translation work.
You said when the Pontiff walked in, you said the Pope looks very happy today.
He really, I think this is a great, great moment for him to be invited. He told me himself what a great honor it is for him to speak to Congress.
Yes. Why is it so meaningful to him?
I think for him, he sees the United States as a great, great nation that can really have influence on the world, touching issues which are very, very dear to him as well as a Pope. Immigration, poverty, human life, dignity, a common ground based on those issues. The work of the nation, the politicians, is really to build a nation. The work of the church is to lead us to heaven. Let's work together. That's why the Pope's so happy today.
Right.
Very powerful.
That message will be well received.
Yes, indeed. We're going to leave it there for now, but we invite you to stay with us for more coverage of Pope Francis' visit to America. We will bring you the Pope's address to Congress live. That begins at 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 7 o'clock Pacific.
This has been a CBS News special report. For Nora O'Donnell in Washington, I'm Charlie Rose with Gail King in New York. CBS News, New York.
For news 24 hours a day, go to cbsnews.com.